I was with some schoolmates and they said, we need a bass player in the band. And I thought, well, what's a bass guitar? So I went home and listened to some records and thought, I don't know what a bass guitar is. And I heard this bass on a record and I thought, what's it doing? It wasn't playing tunes. It wasn't doing what percussion does. It wasn't strumming like a guitar. I thought, how does it work? How does it function? So I listened and listened and listened, and then I asked my guitar teacher to tell me what a bass was, and he explained how it worked. And I found that leanings towards the bass were much stronger than the guitar. And I was working with guitar players at the time who were very good. And it made me realise that I was never going to be a guitar player, I was more of a bass player. I'd been playing with a little rock group at school, and then my mother saw an ad in the paper, musicians wanted for the London Youth Jazz Orchestra. I went along as a guitar player because they had a bass player, and there was another guitar player who was much better than me, and I said to the band leader, I do play bass. The band leader said, are you better than the bass player we're using at the moment? And I said, yeah. He said, OK, start next week on bass guitar. And that was kind of my back way into the business, if you like. I didn't come through the rock group way. I came through, if you like, the jazz way. I always wanted to be a studio player because all my favourite players were studio players. So they spent all day in studios developing lines. So I started collecting different American forms of bass playing, like the Memphis style, people like Isaac Hayes, that sort of music was very influential. The New York players, the LA players, the more southern players, David Hood, those sort of people. But then I got into Motown, and Motown was massively influential. I've asked people like Chuck Rainey how he started, and he said, same way we all did, JAMERSON. He was fundamentally playing jazz bass lines, which was syncopated. And when I was working for a whole variety of different artists, I was able to play these different styles. That's when they started to book me for different sorts of work, not just live, but in studios. I wanted to work with drummers and keyboard players in a much more sort of intimate way so that we could produce these styles, but in some ways move them on. For instance, you couldn't play the Motown style in the 80s because it started 20 years before. So I wanted to be able to do a more contemporary version of that form of music. And that got me into session playing. And then when I didn't want to do studio playing anymore, it got me out playing live again with people like Barbara Thompson and John Heisman. I did some stuff with ELKIE Brooks, Cliff Richard. I did lots of television shows, people like Tom Jones, Janet Jackson, George Benson, Al Jarreau. John Miles was lovely to work with. I did quite a few movies, the odd Bond movie, Hotel du Lac, Labyrinth for Trevor Jones, who was working in London, and David Bowie, who was the singer on some of the tracks, was in New York, but the tracks were in the wrong key, and he had about 3 days to finish the soundtrack. 6 of us got together, changed the keys of various tunes, so David in New York would have an idea how he was going to reach the high notes, and blasted through, got the whole thing finished. CLEO LAINE was a big influence early on, and working with her in some very prestigious places like the Festival Hall and then in big halls all over Europe was a real eye-opener. They gave me an idea of what it was like to be a professional musician, having to get to places on time, having to work to a high standard, having to be very disciplined so that you're able to play what the artist wants you to play. So it's learning to keep your eyes and ears open so that you can work with these people to the level that they want you to work at. These days, your career can't begin and end with one thing. You can't be a player and that's the end of it. You've got to do all sorts of different things. I found that writing music was very important. So I did about 16 commercial albums for DeWolf and KPM, which were entirely my compositions. And then I got into writing jazz things and various kinds of world music, which I'm now involved in. So it's all the crumbs that make up the pie, if you like, all these different aspects. So that's how I got involved in what I've done all my life.